So I've been thinking about making another diary video. Well, here it is. Let's talk about triage for a moment, shall we? When I was around 10 years old, I attended a school that used an area of the playground covered in asphalt for kickball matches in PE. Despite a grass field next to this location that was within the school playground area, no effort was made to create a safer sporting zone, and the asphalt was used instead. The asphalt wasn't well cared for, so there were dips in the ground, loose gravel, etc. Unsurprisingly, there were injuries. I was one of them. During a kickball game, I fell while running and bloodied my right hand. The PE instructor said I was fine, and should just go back to my spot. Since he turned his back a moment later, I ignored him, walked off to the nearest restroom, and began running water over my hand and pulling out the larger chunks of gravel, though I was unsuccessful at removing the smaller bits. As attempting to move two of my fingers was very painful, I felt the injury was severe enough to merit a second opinion. I went to the campus office and said that I was hurt during kickball, and had just spent 5 minutes cleaning my hand in the bathroom. The nurse then looked at my arm and said I was fine and should go back to the field. I complained to the adults present that I had spent 10 minutes in the bathroom cleaning my hand, and was immediately grilled on apparently lying about my injury because of this time discrepancy on whether I was in the bathroom for 5 minutes or 10. For me, 5 or 10 was an approximation. Being 10 years old, I had no expectation that pinpointing the timing was significant to whether or not my injury existed. Convinced these adults were wrong based on my inability to move two fingers, and convinced that their reasoning for disbelief was faulty considering my cleaner-than-average discipline record, I insisted that my mother be called. She took me to a doctor's office where we discovered that I had 3 broken bones and needed a cast. I'd say the discrepancy between viewing a bloody arm with chunks of gravel stuck in it as fine instead of 3 broken bones is a bit more significant than the difference between 5 or 10 minutes cleaning. Wouldn't you agree? I wonder, though, what would have happened had I obeyed the adults, ignored the injury for the next several hours, and attempted to continue playing sports with broken bones? My associates with more medical qualification tell me that continuing to pressure already injured body parts is a good way to severely worsen the injury or potentially make injuries permanent. Good thing I wasn't willing to listen to the school's authority. I'd already been convinced listening to them would do more harm than good as a result of previous incidents. That was, I feel, the main reason I accepted the idea of switching to a private school, because I had been convinced these malignancies would be less of an issue. Of course, I spent the next 5 years in private religious schools where they didn't have any medical staff at all, and the corruption issues were worse. Or perhaps they were the same, but I just noticed them easier with age. Standards are so relative, aren't they? I'm told schools for wealthier people don't suffer from as severe afflictions, but that doesn't much help the average American. Let's skip ahead to another example, and then we'll arrive at my point. It's several years later, and Balthazar is now waiting for a bus at a transit center. There's a middle-aged woman in her late 30s or early 40s in pain on a bench, and Balthazar is pondering with a couple bystanders about what's wrong with her. One is a teenage girl, one is a middle-aged man wearing one of those orange working vests and seems to have been cleaning trash off the street. Balthazar goes and sits on the bench next to the woman and asks where the pain is, and she says her left side. Balthazar rules out appendicitis, since that's the right side, and the man with the orange working vest speculates that she may have a kidney stone. After more pondering, Balthazar asks the woman if she feels she should go to a hospital, and she says yes. Balthazar has already noticed that she has a phone with her and could have called 911, but hasn't yet. Balthazar waits for another minute or so, then asks if she's going to call 911. After a few moments, her response is, "You can dial faster than me." The teenage girl then leans over to Balthazar and whispers into his ear, "You'd need to pay for it. Does she know that?" For those foreigners watching the video, let me fill you in. You don't just call an ambulance for someone in the United States, especially if you're in a poor area. If you try it, you could face fines, liability, etc. Certain establishments might be able to do it depending on their business insurance or regulations, but it depends. By not calling 911 herself, or attempting to, despite the time allotted to do so, this woman was clearly trying to outsource the expenses to whatever bystander that seemed to care the most about her well-being. In this case, the target was me. So now we have a dilemma. Should you attempt to do something for this person when your only indicator to their personality is an attempt to take advantage of you? Pause the video if you feel like you need more time to answer. I didn't have forever, so I'm moving on in 3, 2... The option I opted for was bureaucracy. My bus arrived, I told the driver that the lady says she was in pain. He called someone whom I presume was his supervisor and said there was a woman on the bench that looked like she needed help. Then he hung up, and we went about our day. I figured a public transport company would have some regulation that allowed them to deal with these situations, what with traffic accidents with passengers on board, or a passenger having a heart attack being a risk. There are many in the United States whom would say that my course of action was too merciful, that I should have taken the indication of manipulation and done nothing, and that if my action resulted in this person living and going on to take advantage of someone, I would thereby have done society a disservice. Others, however, would argue my course of action was the moral one, but is that an embellishment? I honestly don't know what happened after I left. The bus company could have discarded the information and done nothing, or she could have just had minor food poisoning and it would have passed in a few days without any need for medical attention at all. Maybe she was a Typhoid Mary and was just trying to screw with people's lives. My actions could have had no consequence, or negative consequence, as easily as they could have had positive. Those thinking I was too merciful would probably argue the negative was more likely. Those arguing the inverse tend to say the benefit of the doubt should be given when dealing with someone's life. One thing that I find interesting is how foreigners react. I've seen several medical scenarios over the years, and if I tell them to a European or Canadian, they often react as if they've been told a horror story. Sometimes more sheltered Americans who lived with certain comforts or never been confronted with such a situation will also react this way. So I'm curious what the results of the ethical dilemma will be in the comments section, considering I seem to have a fairly high amount of non-American viewers. As for how this is relevant to my political positions, well, I'm sure it would sound nice to say that I'd like to create a world where no child has to see the things I've seen, but without those experiences, I wouldn't be the same person I am today. What I would like is for those experiences to be obtained more safely. This is one of the reasons I'm so fond of educational reforms, and ties partially into how I define a meritocracy. I feel basic medical skills and training for pressure situations where quick decisions must be made should be something people learn as they go through their education, since they're going to be entrusted the task of driving a car, or voting, or happening across a hazard situation, and that's not even mentioning the infrastructure upgrades needed. Looking back over the years, one of the conclusions I've come to is that the survival of the fittest mentality often used in America is really just survival of random chance, and is highly impractical. I could have hurt myself very badly if I listened to adults when I was 10, and continued trying to catch a kickball with broken bones, and I don't think it's reasonable to expect a 10-year-old to perform medical duties on themselves, and have to know when to override adult decisions when neither is taught in the schooling system before this point. So, my dear viewers, how about that ethical dilemma I mentioned earlier? What would you have done? Or, another valid question, if you're a foreigner, I'm curious, how does your country handle these two situations I presented? Insert end of video pandering here. I'll see you next time.